All right, we all know that the beef rib is one of the best items of barbecue, hands down. It's hard to beat something that tender and juicy. It's just hard to beat. But the Pitmaster X channel said that we should stop doing our beef ribs that way. So let's take a look at what they have to say about this and what method they're offering in exchange. So let's check that out.
Beef ribs, as you know them, are about to change. Beef ribs are a wonderful thing, and in the past years they have grown to epic proportions, almost to the status of a brisket. And there's good reasons for that. Because it's juicy, it's tender, and when you barbecue them, they just become so intense, so flavorful, so aromatic. And that's
Correct.
why we all love them. But today we're changing all of that. You, me, we are going to make beef ribs better. Woo!
That
Let
seems
me show
impossible.
you the old beef ribs first. These are beef ribs as we know them, and this is how we love them so much. This is a
Correct.
Black Angus rack of short ribs. Beautiful ribs at the bottom with a thick layer of meat laying on top of them. And all they need is a little bit of seasoning. The first step in the traditional beef ribs way is to remove the silver skin, make the ribs look good, and then work on a seasoning, which in my case is going to be the Texas beef rub. It consists of a tablespoon of salt, 2 tablespoons of ground black pepper, half a tablespoon of garlic powder, and half a tablespoon of onion powder. Mix that up and sprinkle
Debatable.
it onto your traditional beef ribs. Place the beef ribs on, make sure you stick in a thermometer so you can keep a track on your traditional beef ribs. And set the barbecue to smoke at a temperature of 140 degrees Celsius. Once the beef ribs hit a core temperature of 70 degrees Celsius, it's time to wrap them. Place the ribs back onto the barbecue and let them cook until a core temperature of 92 degrees Celsius, which is really important to get the perfect traditional beef ribs. Let them rest for at least an hour or so, and then it's time to unpack, and that's how you just created the perfect traditional barbecue beef ribs.
Yeah, delicious.
Now, let me show you the other way to make beef ribs. And you probably haven't seen this before because it's never been done before. Beef ribs are not the same as baby back ribs. Beef
Correct.
ribs are more like a special cut, something really completely different compared to what we do with our pigs. And the idea with the pigs is that we use waste and turn them into something delicious. That's why barbecue meat traditionally is very cheap. But somehow, when beef ribs got into play, we forgot all about that and took a most expensive cut and then turned it into something freaking expensive, which tasted good, but cost a lot of money. How about we go back to the original idea? Take a little bit of waste and make that freaking amazing. And this is my waste because this is like the baby back ribs of beef. Maybe you recognize it from the back. Can you tell which ribs these are? Normally, on the other side, you would have, that's right, ribeye. This would normally be a giant rib roast, but people order ribeye. So what do? They cut off the ribeye, and this is scraps. This gets trimmed up, and all these little bits go into a meat grinder and end up in your burger. But
Okay, so what he's talking about here is in
I
get that face off. In in pork, where they make those baby back ribs, the loin that's below it, if you cut those individually, that becomes the pork chop. Um, but in the baby back pork ribs, it's more valuable to have the more meat on the rib. So you get a thicker rib, and that's what people want, because the loin is a less valuable meat. Not the case in beef. So, like what he's talking about, that's where you would get the ribeye. Well, we know it's a very high value meat. It's very marbled. It's delicious. It's tender, all that kind of stuff. So it makes more sense for the butcher to, cut closer to the bone, and kind of save some of that, and give more, kind of value to the actual, like the ribeye part of it. So that's kind of why what he's talking about is that these are waste meat because you're losing a lot of that. So what you get is these kind of like beef finger rib type deal, like these beef back finger ribs. And if you've ever gotten them from the store, you can find. I'm in Texas, you can find them pretty regularly. But I didn't know any better one time. When I first got started, I was like, "Oh, beef ribs, here we go," and it was not the same thing. However, I did notice that they were very flavorful. So if you ever see like beef finger ribs or whatever, that's the meat that comes in between the ribs. And that can be it can be incredibly delicious. And if you're in the competition circuit, what they'll do is they'll like kind of sacrifice every other rib in order to have like a ton of meat per rib, and that's called like the Hollywood cut. So that's kind of a little bit of background there as to like why like these are such kind of scrap meat, is because they're cutting really close to the bone, because that is that that loin, or like that ribeye portion is a much more valuable piece of meat than the actual ribs there. I personally do prefer like a big beef rib, I'd prefer that. But I'll see what he says. I mean, like, we'll see what, I mean, that's why we're here, to see what the alternative is, and him taking some of like the scrap meat, as he's calling it. So we'll see.
I've got a better way than to turn this into burgers. We can use this waste and turn it into the most delicious beef ribs you've ever had. Side note, before I'm getting started on preparing this, the biggest question that people have is, how do I order this at the butcher? Because this is not in the store. That's correct. This is in the waste bin, so you got to order it special.
Unless you're in Texas and you can get it from the grocery store.
Just ask the butcher for him to give you the bones when he takes the ribeye off. So he has that beautiful piece, and then instead of throwing that in the trash, the bones, give them to you. Well, maybe you pay him a little bit, but you get the idea. You gotta have your butcher on speed dial anyways, because there might be a PitMasterX video on Thursday and you need it by Friday.
Sure.
I'm gonna sprinkle down a little bit of the beef rub we made earlier. I'm gonna flip it around and do the same thing on the other side. Now with the membrane, we do want to cut into it. Normally, I would just tear the membrane off. But with these ribs, we're going to use a technique that requires us to leave the membrane on.
I'll be interested to see this, because on beef ribs specifically, if you have any, experience with the regular beef short ribs, you really need that membrane to be on there to hold the rib together. So, and I wouldn't take it off. Plus, it keeps all that fat in there. So, this will be interesting to see where he goes with this, as it's a part of his process.
Then the rub goes onto the membrane, and now it can actually penetrate into the meat. And to make sure that that happens, I'm going to rub it in with my hand, get it nice and in there, in the nooks and crannies. A little bit extra, more flavor, the better it is. And now this is also ready for the barbecue. I currently have my Kamado still set up the way that it would traditionally be set up when smoking beef ribs. But that's going to change, because we're not smoking the traditional beef ribs. No. We're going to be roasting. Oh, that's hot. I burned myself again. We're going to remove the heat deflectors, and we're going to expose the charcoal that sits on the bottom. And with my ash tool, I'm going to remove all the ashes, let them fall into the ashtray, breaking up the big block charcoal a little bit so it's nice and evenly spread out. And then it's time for me to put the grill grates back in. And now I'm going to put the ribs straight onto the barbecue. And look at the size of this piece of meat. And now I'm grilling these beef ribs over direct heat. The heat is coming straight up to that membrane and roasting in it at a temperature of around 140 degrees. But the difference between this and the traditional beef ribs is that we have radiation heat instead of convection heat. With this setup, I gotta make sure that I control my temperatures, because the fat of the meat is going to render down, it's going to drip into the fire, it's going to create all kinds of amazing flavor. We want things to slow down. I want it to really be roasted at a low temperature as possible, so I'm going to go down to the bottom vent. I'm going to set it to like a millimeter, like a tiny bit, so you can just fit the nail of your finger into it. That's the only little bit that's going to be open. And at the top, we're going to leave it open so the hot air and the smoke can escape.
Yep.
So we have clean air coming up from the bottom, and we're basically smoldering the fire a little bit. We got to check on it regularly, because it's going to go a lot faster than with the smoked beef ribs. It's more of a gentle version, the traditional one. And now we're really getting into the hardcore version of it. 20 minutes have gone by. Time to check on the ribs. Wow, look at that. The bones already started popping. Now let's take a look on the other side. Whoa, right. Look at the caramelization of the meat. The membrane started to crispen up, and that's why we needed to cut into it, so that it will turn into crunchy, delicious meat. And this thing is starting to look freaking amazing. Bones are starting to pop, which means the meat is tearing off the bones. We're getting nice crusty bark on the outside. Now we're going to do exactly the same thing at the other side of the meat. And as you can see, we're getting flare-ups from the fat dripping down. So we got to close the lid quickly and let this beautiful meat continue to cook. We want just as nice of a crust. We want just as nice of juicy meat on one side as on the other. And keep in mind that cooking time is going to be completely different because you're working with
Right.
thin meat and you're working with the ribs that were connected to the ribeye, which means much more tender meat than that you're used to with beef ribs. Another 20 minutes
More tender than I'm used to? I'm used to some pretty tender beef ribs, man.
have gone by and it's time to check on the ribs, and bones are popping. Absolutely gorgeous looking meat. Look at that caramelization. Look at that redness. And you can see we got a little bit of a shiner here. The fat's rendered down.
A shiner is what they call, like when they trim the meat down, and they'll trim it so close that like the bone shines through. It's usually like a pejorative term, like where it's not like a good term to use for that. So again, you can see through there that like a lot of the meat's going to come in between there. Now this is actually a pretty decently meaty rack, but we'll see, how that turns out. But yeah, again, you'll get a lot of the meat is in between the ribs more than on top. So that's what a shiner is.
This looks like one of the best barks that I ever had on beef ribs. And I achieved this result in only 40 minutes of cooking time. I'm waiting for the applause. Do you hear? Do you want to taste it first? And before we taste it, of course, we're going to do a long rest because we've been stressing out this meat like no other. The meat is shrunken up. And it's just like, feels like this. And then we need it to go like this again. Like, oh. I'm going to wrap these ribs up so that we can do a side-by-side comparison to our traditional ribs.
Cool.
Before I'm going to show you the end result, I'm first going to give you my favorite beef rib sauce.
Ooh, an Alabama
This
white.
is our new and perfected Alabama white sauce made out of 1 cup of mayonnaise, half a cup of apple cider vinegar, half a tablespoon of salt, a tablespoon of garlic powder, a tablespoon of sugar, a tablespoon of coarse black pepper, and 2 tablespoons of horseradish. And we finished off with 1 teaspoon of Worcester sauce. And we always keep on perfecting our sauces, and we think this is one of the world's best versions of the Alabama white sauce.
If you can nail an Alabama white sauce, that is the jam. It's so good. It's also easy like to fuck it up too, and then it's terrible. But if you nail it, it's really good.
Let us know what you think of our recipe. And now we're ready for the side-by-side comparison. Of course, the taste test is going to be performed. But first, let's take a look on the outside of the ribs and see what the difference is between traditional and the new way to grill ribs. Let's first take a look at the bark of this beautiful, traditionally smoked beef rib. You can see that the color of the bark is dark brown. It is moist on the outside because it's been wrapped and it's been resting. And the bark looks freaking amazing. There's a little bit of dark red visible here. And overall, it looks very, very tasty. But then let's go over here and take a look at these roasted beef ribs. The color spectacle on these ribs is phenomenal. We got dark red, just like beef jerky over here. Then we got some of that barbecue bark over here. We got rendered out fat here. So we got so much more different colors. And it looks so much better than the traditional smoked beef ribs. Now in itself, that's not saying much because looks can be deceiving and it all comes down to what it tastes like.
I don't know if I'd say it looks better. It just looks different.
A good telltale sign to see if you cooked your ribs properly is to see if the bones already popped. So the meat starts pulling away from the bone. You can see that it happened to our roasted ribs, and you can see that it happened to our smoked ribs.
It's always going to happen on the low and slow beef ribs, but the pullback isn't always an indicator. Like you can have perfectly cooked ribs that didn't get the pullback. You want the pullback for a variety of reasons, but it's not the only indicator that they're ready. And also, it's not the indicator that they are ready. You still may need some more.
Are they fall apart tender? Well, let's find out. Let's see with the grilled ribs. Can we pull them out? We can almost pull them out, but we have to apply a little bit of force. Same with the beef ribs. We can pull them out, but it's not fall apart tender. Now let's slice into them and take a look inside. Look at that. A beautiful smoke ring, juicy ribs, all around great, tasty looking
Yeah, actually, a little bit of smoke ring on that, which is interesting.
ribs. Let's take a look at the traditional beef ribs. Beautiful smoke ring once again. Delicious and juicy, just like we like them. And now comes my favorite part, the taste test.
Yeah.
Whee-oo! Right, grilled ribs first. Mm. Whoa.
Man, that looked like a really tender bite, surprisingly. It went right his bite went right through. That looks delicious.
Mm. No. Mm.
Yeah,
Let's start by saying both of the ribs taste freaking amazing.
yeah,
This is excellent result, and you can serve this up to your guests anytime. Don't worry about it. It's going to be good and tasty. But the smoked ribs, they have their traditional flavor profile. The meat is succulent and soft and tender, and it's really something that you have to put effort into, and you have to almost love it and take care of it like a little baby. With the grilled ribs, they're much more manly and tough and manhandled. Like they kind of need to be mistreated to taste good. You got to have that crust and crunchy bit and all these kinds of things. You trade off a little bit of tenderness to these ribs, but
yeah.
you get cheaper ribs. They taste freaking amazing and they take a lot less time to cook. So if you're up for a shorter cook, a cheaper rib, and a real manly bite, then you might want to.
Yeah, again, you can see there. I mean, it looks delicious. Don't get me wrong, and you can see there that he's got that little shiner there. Again, the meat's being on the side, but look at that color. That he's right. It looks incredibly delicious.
Try these beautiful roasted ribs. So go to your butcher and ask him for his garbage.
I
The sauce.
Oh,
didn't try
now
that.
that is an Alabama white sauce. Forget about chicken, man. Roll Tide.
Roll damn
Quite
tide.
amazing.
That looks so good. Okay, so once again, I'm doing this on an empty stomach, so I'm starving. But I mean, I don't think I will stop smoking my beef ribs in the traditional fashion. However, that does look like a really viable option, and adding to the list of things that I will try, this is something that I will absolutely try. Looks delicious. He's hilarious. Made it a lot of fun and a cook. So, and that white sauce looks very tasty. So, yeah, man, if you don't have the time, it's like my 2-hour brisket video. Yeah, let's get that California brisket. Let's get that tri-tip, and you can do a really delicious, dish in 2 hours or less, 2.5 hours. So, this looks amazing. I will definitely do a side by side comparison. I don't think anything will ever unseat beef ribs as like the king of barbecue or the supreme ruler. But this looks like an awesome, viable option. So I'll definitely be trying this one. And as usual, I'm going to have more coming out with the trials and the comparisons to see how everything's going. So thanks for joining us, and I look forward to seeing you on the next one.